Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Masechtas Bava Daf Nun. We are going to begin on the bottom of Mem Tes Amud Beis by the new Mishnah. Says the Masnisin, Chayfer Bor B'Reshus Yachid. Let's say a person digs a pit, but it's in the private property. However, Pischa Reshus Rabim, the entrance to this pit is protruding outward into the public domain, or for that matter, over Reshus Rabim, you make this big pit in the middle of the street, even though the opening to it is in the private area, and even if it's one Reshus Yachid, but the opening is in someone else's Reshus Yachid, so then in that situation you're going to be chayiv. Why? Says Rashi, Diksavar Chayuv Debor, the obligation of a pit, Bein B'Reshus Rabim, Bein B'Reshus Yachid He, Avad Sheyafgir Reshusai. Even though you don't own it, or the property has this the Reshus Rabim, still you're going to be chayiv for this action, which is a big chiddush according to this, that it's not just Bor B'Reshus Harabim, but even though you don't necessarily even own the property, doesn't make any difference. You're still going to be chaim. Tanurban, says the Gemara. Tanurban, a chayfer bor b'reshus yachid u'pischa b'reshus rabim, b'reshus rabim pischa b'reshus yachid, chaim. So in this situation, you're going to be chaim, as the Mishnah said. V'zeh bor ha'omer b'tayra divrei Rabbi Shmuel. So this is, as Rabbi Shmuel says, this is referring to the pit as mentioned in the Torah. The Torah specifically is referring to this, actually question 7. Be'ez bor pligi be Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Kiva ichayvil of Torah. So according to the sheet of Rabbi Shmuel, it's interesting. He mentions Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Kiva. And the question says, so it's a machlokas of Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef. So we're not there yet. But it said Rabbi Shmuel is in the opinion that if you dig a pit in Reshus Yachid and the opening is in Reshus Rabbi, maybe we're not supposed to read those parentheses, so we'll just stick without it. So since you dug a pit, since the opening goes into the Reshus Rabbi, in that situation you're chayiv, and that's actually what the Torah is referring to. Now, why is that? So Rashi says, Kivan shahatakala Reshus Rabim, since the danger of falling into the pit is in the public, it's no different than actually digging a pit in the Reshus Rabim itself. So as long as the Pesach, the opening to this pit, is in the Reshus Rabim, so it's akin to actually digging the entire pit in the Reshus Rabim. Rabbi Kiva Omer back in the Gemara, Hifgir Reshusai. If you're mafkir your domain, vohifkir boyroi, but you're not mafkir your pit, which means you still want ownership of the pit, but the reshus in which it's on, you're mafkir. Zebor hama b'tayra. Okay. So now the question is, where do they argue? So on this, Amar Rabba, b'bor b'reshus harabim kumulu pligi the mechayim. When it comes to digging a pit in the Reshus Harabim, everyone, both Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva, hold they're going to be chayiv. My time, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Kiv tach, when you open up a pit, v'chi yichre, when you dig it, im al psicha chayiv al kriyul koshikain. If you open up a pit, you're chayiv, which means it was already there, and all you did was open up the lid, and a person falls, you're going to be chayiv. So if you're the one that actually dug the pit, obviously you're going to be chayiv. What's the whole point? El shall iske psicha. It's for the action of the opening, and it's for the iske, it's for the action of the digging, is what it's coming to tell you. And therefore, it doesn't make any difference that you're the one that just opened up the lid, but since you did an action which caused danger in Reshus Rabim, so everyone holds you're going to be chayiv in that situation. Well, Nechaku, and this is going to eventually get to number 7, Ella, as we continue to Nun Amud Aleph, where did they, namely the Shittas of Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel, disagree? Babor b'reshusai, if the pit is actually in private property. Rabbi Kiva Savar Bar B'Shuso Nami Chayiv. Even if the pit is in private property, you're still chayiv. Tichsiv, as the pasuk says, Baal Habor, the owner of the pit, Babor Isbe Baalim Koim Rachmana. It's talking about, obviously, if there's a Baal Habor, it's talking about a situation where there is an owner, and therefore you're still chayiv. So what does that mean? Didn't he say, that's not what he says. That's not the sheet of Rabbi Kiva. So it means like this. He was mafkir his property, but he was not mafkir his pit. The pit, he's still the Baal Habor. That's what it means. Baal Habor, that he's only the owner of the pit, but he's not the owner of the property because he was mafkir the property. So that's what the pasuk is saying, chayiv. So, and again, he was mafkir his property. Otherwise, he could say, why are you trespassing in my property? So he only owns the bore. So very interesting. If it would be that I own the property and I have a pit in the middle of my property, and you come into my property shlo b'rshus without permission, and you're trespassing and you injure yourself, I can say, "What are you doing in my home? What are you doing in my property? You have no business being here." So therefore, it has to be, in order to be chayiv, that you were mafker the rishus, which means that people could walk around, but you are not mafker the bor. In that situation, he says, you're going to be chayiv. Rabbi Shmuel Savar, Bal Hatakala. What does that mean? Says Rashi, Oyom Rishus Harabim. The only time you're going to be chayiv, as the pasuk says, is in Rishus Harabim. Over Rishusoi, if it's your Rishus, and the Alpha P Shehifkir, even though you're mafker that Rishus, and you still own that property, potter. In that situation, he's going to say, you are potter. So, therefore, that in question number 7, this is in accordance to the shita of Rabbi. He holds the machlokas is bor b'rishusai, where you're mafker rishus and not the bor, whether or not you're going to be chayiv or not. Okay, so Baal Takala, again, is the one who injured himself. So we're not going to be mechayev the individual who owns the pit. Elwa my zehu bor ha'omer b'Torah dikar Rabbi Kiva. What exactly does that mean? Since we know you're also chayiv in your own chayiv in your own property too. Zehu bor shepasach bo ha'kasav tchila l'tashulman. This is the pasuk in which it begins talking about the laws of damages. Okay. Rav Yosef Omer b'bor b'shus yachid kol yamul plegi. Rav Yosef says no. If we're dealing with a pit in which is in rishus hayachid, no one's going to argue to mechayev. You're going to actually be chayev in this situation. My time, a baal haboram rachman b'bor di ismei baal maskinan. So in other words, according to the shita Rabba, he says no. They actually do not argue when it comes to a situation where mafki your rishus, but not your bor. In that situation, you would be chayev. Ki plegi, according to Rabbi Yosef, this is also going to be part of question 7. Ki plegi b'bor b'rishus harabim. Interestingly enough, he says that a bor b'rishus harabim is where they argue. Rabbi Shmuel Savar bor b'rishus harabim nami chayev. If you dig a pit in rishus harabim, you're chayev. Dechsev ki yiftach v'chi yichra. Ima psicha chayev, as we said before, if you're chayev for just opening up the pit, al kriel kol sheken certainly should be chayev for digging it. El shal iski psicha del iski kriel. It's referring to for the action of opening it, for the action of digging it, which means that therefore a bor b'rishus harabim, according to him, based on this drasha, you're going to be chayev. So, boloi, Rabbi Kiva, who says you're potter. So therefore, he says you're going to be chayiv. Rabbi Kiva asks, you're going to say you're potter bor b'rishus harabim. Hanhu mitzrach srichi. What will he do with the fact that it mentions digging a pit and opening up a pit? Again, as we said, if opening up a pit you're chayiv, so then if you're the one that dug it, certainly you're going to be chayiv. Now, dikas v'rachmana ki yiftach. It always says you open it up. Maybe we're talking about a situation where you open it that it was just enough, all you have to do is cover it. Kaira, when it comes to digging, covering it up is not enough. The timely, maybe you have to put earth back on it. In other words, what did you do wrong? You opened up some type of manhole. So all you would need to do is cover up that manhole. But maybe when it comes to digging a big pit, maybe it's not enough just to cover it. Maybe it's necessary that you actually have to put earth into it. So therefore, the point is, of a chiyiftach, so it comes to tell you, again, the chiddush is that when it comes to digging a big hole, you don't have to cover it up with earth. You just have to secure the hole with some type of a covering to make sure that people are safe from falling in. Because maybe only when it comes to digging a big hole, it needs to be covered. Because you did something. If all you did was just lift up a lid, you didn't really do much. So therefore, by both, you need to cover it. But since you're pater, according to Rabbi Kiva, he says you're going to be pater, according to Rabbi Kiva, by bor b'reshus harabim. But he does say you should still cover it. What does that mean to come Rabbi Shmuel? Doesn't mean this is the only situation where a person can be chayiv. There's other situations, but this is the place where the Torah opens up and discusses it. So again, question 7. This is a little bit lengthy, but now we can answer question 7. So according to the Shita of Rabba, the machlokes between them is a bor b'reshusai, namely you're mafkir your reshus, but you kept ownership, you're the Baal HaBor. That's where the argument is. Or according to Rav Yosef, bor b'reshus harabim, whether you're chayiv or pater. Okay, let's continue. So, Meisvei, the Gemara asks the following question. HaChayfer bor b'reshus harabim. It says beferish in our Mishnah that a person digs a hole in Reshus Harabim, u'pischoi Reshus Yachid, pater. It's the key. The opening actually doesn't say this, but it could be inferred from our Mishnah that even though you dug a hole in the Reshus Harabim, since the opening was in the Reshus Hayachid, so therefore you're pater. Now, v'yafal b'shein Reshai Lasos Kain, not supposed to do this. You're not supposed to make a bunch of holes in the Reshus Harabim, but nonetheless you're pater because the only way you could have got into this hole was derech Reshus Hayachid, which you had no business going to the private domain. Therefore, because of that, you're going to be pater if someone does. Okay, so we're going to keep that first part in mind. And then let's continue. So the person digging a bunch of holes, caves, cisterns. He does it Reshus Hayachid. He does this in the private property. However, Pislu Reshus Harabim chayiv. So here's the opposite. It was dug in Reshus Hayachid, but the opening was in Reshus Harabim. In that situation, you're chayiv, and that does the Mishnah did say. But chayiv for boyers Reshus Hayachid, person dug a hole in a private area, hasmuch Reshus Harabim, but it happens to be very close to the street. Going, for example, going elu hachayfrin ushin, someone who digs for the foundation of his house, pater. Rashi says, ushin is yisoid, like a foundation, l'chaymus beisai, for the walls of his house, al pnei kol roicha habayis eitzel Reshus Harabim. So basically, he's building, and of course nowadays we put these huge walls around our property when we are doing major construction, but basically what happens is you are digging the foundation and there's holes. Now it's in the Reshus Hayachid, but it happens to be your property is pretty close to the street, and therefore you would maybe think if a person falls into it, you'd be pater, you'd be chayiv. So on this it says you're pater. It says Rashi, "V'hainu nami kechayver bor b'reshusai the islay baum v'hifker reshusai." So he says that this is comparable. I hope I'm reading the right Rashi, to someone who dug holes in his reshus. He still wants those holes because he needs them for his foundation. And it's like he was mafkir his own reshus. My boy's reshusi. He can't say, "What are you doing on my property?" Hachanami He can't say lama halcha behemtacha al safasoi. Why is your animal by my edge? Because the animals are walking with shusarabim. Nonetheless, you're potter. He actually disagrees and says you're chayiv ad sheyasa mechitza asara o ad sheyarchik mimakam drisas ragli adam umimakam drisas ragli behema arba tefachim. So interestingly enough, very similar to again what we do is that you have to build a wall, maybe not as tall as the walls that we build now when we're engaged in construction building, but they had he said you have to build a wall 10 tefachim, or you should at least distance it from where people walk or where animals walk at least 4 tefachim, so, which is an element of a makam choshev. Anyway, so Taima, going back to the first shita, says that when it comes to digging a hole in your property, why are you potter is only dilushin, is because you're digging for a purpose. You're digging for your foundation. You needed it. There's no other way around it. You need to do this in order to be able to build a house. You need to be able to build this foundation. Holav l'ushin chayim, which is mashma, that if you're just stam digging a hole, you would be chayiv. Okay, and therefore this is going to be an issue, because as we just said, what are we talking about? Look at Rashi. Alma bor b'rshuso chayiv. The kasha racial seifa. It's actually going to be a stira in the racial seifa, because clearly we see that if you dig a hole in your rishus, you're chayiv. The only reason why you're potter is only you're doing it for building a foundation. So therefore, the question is, how could it say over here you're chayiv, where it's in the ratio, it says that if you have your chayfer bor, if you dug a pit, and it was in the rishus yachid, so you should be potter. So hamani. So who's this like? Now bishlam or Rabba. Now we have to hold the sheetus over here. What did Rabba say? Rabba said that the machlokes, which can Rabbi Shimon or Rabbi Kiva, is referring to the case of mafkir your rishus, but you're the Baal Habor, you own the pit. So bishlam or Rabba, Reish Rabbi Shimon v'Sefer Rabbi Kiva. So according to Rabba, a bor in your rishus is actually a machlokes. So you could establish this just like this. Again, because it said in the Reisha, it says hachayfer bor b'shus rabim upislo rishus yachid potter. So the opening, the entrance is in the rishus yachid. It says you're potter, but yet it's mashma. Only reason why you're potter is l'ishan. However, if it wasn't for a foundation, you would be chayiv. So it's okay, fine. So that goof, according to Rabbi, is the machlokes from Yishmon Rabbi Kiva. When it comes to a person who is mafkir his rishus, but not his pit, or as we're saying, like these foundation, or just stop, we're talking about a pit. So in that situation, it's a machlokes. So the ratio where it says you're potter, and the seifa says is mashmi bichayev. Okay, so it's based on that machlokes. El Rav Yosef. According to Rav Yosef, it's difficult. Bishlam seifa devir hakoil, because according to Rav Yosef, he says no. Bor b'shus hayachid kulim u'lepligid b'chayev. He says you're always chayev. So then the seifa makes sense. El reisha mani Lord B'Yishmael Rabbi Kiva. How does he establish the reisha which says that you're potter? So Omar Amalach Rav Yosef would say to you the following answer. He would say like this: Kula divri hakolhi. Really, this entire brisa is in accordance to everyone. So the seifa makes sense, but how do you understand the reisha? The reisha shel hifker lo rishusay lo boydai. Over in the reisha, the reason why you're potter is because it's not that you were just you're mafkir your property, but not the pit. There, you're mafkir. You are not mafkir anything. So here, everyone says you're going to be potter, since he had no right to enter into your property, and it wasn't hefker. So since I wasn't mafkir my rishus, you had no business going into my rishus, and therefore the fact that the pischa is rishus yachid, you had no business being in my property, and therefore that's all explaining. And everyone holds that that if a person is going to go into your property without permission, it's not your fault because you own this property and he had no business going to your property. So therefore, in that situation, everyone will hold you to be potter. Amravashi, Hashta de Ukimtel Rabbi Yosef Udiver Hakoil. So now that we established this whole brisa in accordance to Rabbi Yosef that everyone agrees to it, so Rabbi Nami lo tokma ketanoi. Let's also say the same thing. We don't want to say that this brisa is a machlokas tanoim. Rather, let's establish it l'divrei hakoil. Midrash Rabbi Shmuel, Sevanam Rabbi Shmuel. So since the ratio is Rabbi Shmuel, so the seif will also be like Rabbi Shmuel. So again, according to the shita of Rabbi Shmuel, in accordance to Rabbi, so we're going to say the same. We're going to say the same thing. The Rabbi Shmuel holds that when you have a pit in which you're a mafker the rishus, but not the pit, he holds that you would be potter. So the seifa sounds good. How does he understand the ratio? The taima delushin halav leishon chayiv. So it's mashma that you would taka be chayiv, but he says you're potter. Kegoin the arvach arvuche rishus harabim. It's where he extends it into the rishus harabim. So this is a case of a bor rishus harabim, which even Rabbi Shmuel holds is chayiv, because according to the shita of Rabba, he says that l'divrei hakoil, which we saw in the previous Amud, he began by saying that they do not argue. They do not argue when it comes to a bor b'rishus harabim. Everyone holds your chayiv. So he'll just say that this is a case where you extended it into the rishus harabim, and that's the reason why you're chayiv. Let's say a person dug a pit, again, in his private property. However, but since the opening went to the rishus harabim, he's chayiv. However, and this is the key line, let's say he dug it in the rishus yachid, but it was only near the rishus harabim, so he's potter. Now, Bishlam or Rabba, according to the shita of Rabba, Kula Rabbi Shmuel, he can say this whole shita is in accordance with Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel holds that when it comes to being mafker your rishus and keeping the pit, Rabbi Shmuel holds your potter. So therefore, the fact that it's smuch rishus harabim, you're potter. It's not in the rishus harabim. El Rav Yosef, according to Rav Yosef, who says that they argue by bor b'rishus harabim, Bishlam Mareisha Rabbi Shmuel, and he says the whole machlokas is bor b'rishus harabim. So Rabbi Shmuel holds bor b'rishus harabim is chayev. So therefore, he can understand the reisha. That makes sense. El seifa mani or Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Kiva. How does he fit the seifa? Darmalach v'chayfer l'ushin v'divrei hakoil. For builders, even though it's extended into the rishus harabim, still it's potter. So it's very interesting. So he's going to say a tremendous chiddush that because it's l'ishin, that's the reason why we're going to be lenient, even if it extends samach rishus harabim. Okay. Tanaban chafar pasach umasal rabim potter. Let's say a person dug a hole and it was opened up, and he gave it over to the rabbim, which basically means that he doesn't have any connection to it. Says Rashi, he says to the people in the whole city, Habor zeh shechafarti, this pit that I dug, sarchachem lishtais megashamim, I know you need to drink rainwater, hamis kansin sham, that's gathering up in this pit. You could drink and have your water your animals, give them what to drink. So harihu masalachem, he gives it over to them. So now it's not just that he's mafker it. Now we have a new transfer of ownership, and this is considered to be like public works, and therefore for that reason he's completely going to be potter. That's why if he's muscle around, he's potter. Chafar pasach v'lo muscle around him chayiv. Or if he just dug a big pit, but he didn't do anything, so in that situation, he's going to be chayiv if someone gets injured. This is the way of Nechunya, who was known to be the person who dug all these pits and all these different public works for animals and for people to drink. That he actually was moisel rabim, so he was not chayiv. In fact, he did it for the sake of the community. When the Chachamim heard about this, Amru, Kiyim zeh halacha zu. Kiyim zu v'sulo, el ema af halacha zu. It doesn't mean that he was only mekayim one halacha in his whole life. It means that he was mekayim this one in particular, but certainly others. Tanaban. This is actually a Gemara in Shkolim. And there's a story about the daughter of Nechunya Chayfer Shichin. Shenafel bar gadol. She fell into a big pit, and you can imagine this was her father's entire parnasa. His entire legacy was doing this great act with Sarchit Tzibor, and his daughter fell into this huge pit. Boy v'hoidiyai as Rabbi Chanina ben Daisa. They went and notified Rabbi Chanina ben Daisa of this tragic thing that happened to Nechunya's daughter. So Sharishan Amalahem showing. The first hour, says Rashi, she could have still have lived. It was filled with water, so she had to be treading water. He said Shaloim, which basically means there's a chance that she can get up. Shnia Amalahem Shalom, Shlishus Amalahem Alta. So the third one, says Rashi, Dahavile Shoy Shetetzi Nasha Im Yesh Nasham. He basically was saying that this is the last opportunity for her to be able to survive. So they said to her, Mi ha'elach, who brought you up? How did you survive? And it's interesting, Chanim and Daisa somehow knew about this. So Amru lahem, so she said to them, Zachar ben Rechelim, I'll tell you, there was a Zachar ben Rechelim. Rashi says, the Elu shel Yitzchak, the ram of Yitzchak, nizdaminly appeared to me. Was Zakin echad manhigoi, and there was this Zakin, which was Avraham Avinu, that led me. Amru lo, so they turned to Rabbi Chanin ben Daisa, which is also the same lashon in Brachos. Naviata, similar lashon. Are you a navi? Amru lahem lo navi anochi lo ben navi anochi, which is exactly what he said. Elokach amarti davar sha'isot tzadik mitztar lo yichashel ba'izaroi. The very thing, which is an unbelievable thing to think about, that you perfect, that is the very thing in which your child will struggle with. And it could be, again, based on legacy, just push-up shot, that your father is so good at something, so you don't want to have anything to do with it, because you have no ability to be able to excel in that area above him. So you're just going to be but a shadow to him. So who's the one who saved her? Interestingly enough, the Eloi Shel Yitzchak. Yitzchak Avinu, there's not much in the Torah about Yitzchak Avinu. You have Avraham, tremendous amount. Yaakov, Yitzchak was a little like a shadow to his father, to Avraham. And nonetheless, he did whatever the bidding of his father was. No matter how great his father was, Yitzchak still did what he was able to do, and to be able to grow to his great level that he was able to grow at. So it's interesting that it was the Elo Shel Yitzchak, it was really like Yitzchak Avinu, together with Avraham, Yitzchak and Avraham, father and son, saved this girl. Okay, but again, it's a tremendous chiddush that you would think that if your father was mitzvah on something, so then you shouldn't struggle with it. But again, that's often what happens in life when a parent does something, then the child may not necessarily wish to do it. And especially, it's very interesting language. It says, it doesn't say what your father was successful with, but it's davar she'oso sadik mitzta'er lo, which means, as Rashi says, he troubled himself digging pits. So if it's tsar, if it's something which is difficult, and the parents are demonstrating the difficulty, the child says, I don't want to do it. So therefore they end up being nichshel in that very same thing. Rabbi Acha, Afal Pikain, even so, Meis Banai Batsama. Even though the daughter was saved, the son died of thirst. Shnemar Usavivav Nisharam Oid. That those around Hashem, it was very turbulent. That he was judged very, very much like even kachut asira, like a little thread, the smallest little imperfection that becomes amplified, and that, of course, is the reality. When you are unbelievably great, so therefore you've raised the bar in this area that you are unbelievable, so the expectation is that you're just always going to be unbelievable. And therefore, the smallest little mistake, people think that you're horrible. You find this in sports. Let's say a great quarterback, he plays and wins game after game after game, and then one game he ends up throwing a few interceptions. People, oh, he's a terrible quarterback, got to get rid of him. What do you mean? He's on the top. But that's how it is in reality. People who are on the top are heavily scrutinized, and this is what happened here as well. Okay. Anyone who says that Hashem looks away, Yavatu Chayav. Says Rashi, Yufgru Chayav. Your life is basically becoming free or ownerless. Basically, it's not a good thing. Shenemer Hatzur Tomim Pa'oloi. That Hashem, who is our strong rock, is aware of our actions. Ki Kol Derachav Mishpat. And all Hashem's ways are just. What does the following pasuk mean as we continue to Nun Amud Beis? Erech Apayim, it says that Hashem is slow to be angered. Fluksiv Erech Af. Erech, so what does that mean? Erech Apayim was Sadikim L'Rishayim. The fact that it says Apayim in Lashon Ramim means that Hashem is not only slow to get angry to the tzaddik, which makes sense, but even to the Rishoyim. Why? It says Rashi, altar, that from punishing them right away. And the chiddush is tzaddikim l'sham schar toivel altar, to give them great reward right away. Tornaban, lo yisakel adam b'reshus rabba. A person should not clear out stones from his rishus and throw them into the street. Misakel, I said. Misakel b'reshus rabba. So a guy actually did this, throwing a bunch of rocks in the middle of the highway. There was a chasa that saw him doing this. A little reka, empty one. Why are you throwing from a rishus, which is not yours, l'rishus shelcha, to a rishus that is yours? So Ligligalav, he started laughing at him because it says Rashi lo hayamakar taimishal davar. He didn't really understand what he was talking about. Well, Yomim later on nitzrachlim chorsedeu, he had to sell his field. And he was in the street. And he actually tripped over the same stones that he had thrown in a long time before. Amr Yafet, Amr Li, Oisachassid. The chassid said, why did you throw those stones from rishus, which is not yours? Because this chassid foresaw that you're probably going to end up losing your property, which he ended up doing. So therefore, he ended up throwing it technically, futuristically, in rishus, which is not his, to a rishus, which is yours, which is the rishus harabim, because that's where everyone can go. Says the next Mishnah. Says Masnis. A person dug a pit in the street, and you have an ox or a donkey that falls into this pit. So you're chayiv. This is a case of bor b'reshus harabim. And even though we said maybe it's a machlokas, but here it's beferish chayiv. Echad hachayfer bor shiach umara. Someone who dug, whether it's a pit, shiach umara, again, different cisterns or caves, charitzin, if they're wide, uni'itzin, even if they're narrow, doesn't matter. Also, Rashi says, A bor ogul hu shiach. A bor, if round is called shiach. So there are different sizes. They could be square or circular. Okay. So it doesn't make any difference, the dimensions, the size, the shape. So im kain lomanem or bor. So why does it mention specifically the case of bor? So ma bor sheish boy kedei l'homis asar tefachim. Now of course sheish boy kedei l'homis asar tefachim. Typically when a person digs a pit that is going to be at least 10 tefachim deep, let's call that 40 inches, if not deeper. And therefore, if an animal would fall into that, there's a great likelihood that it could get killed due to such a fall. And therefore, when it comes to any other type of hole, it's also, you're only going to be chayiv if it's if the animal dies or injured 10 tefachim. Let's say you only dug something a few tefachim deep. So the Mishnah makes an important distinction. If the animal dies somehow, and the pit was only 3 tefachim, just landed awkwardly, so you're potter, because that really is not kanei l'hamas. It did die, but maybe there was some other reason why it died. Maybe the animal was sick, it was a treifa anyway, or who knows? Or again, it's something which is beyond the realm of what's considered to be normal. So in that situation, if that animal falls and dies, you're potter. However, if the animal falls even on a small pit, less than 10 tefachim, you're still going to be chayav for damages. Says the Gemara. Omarav. So now we have this famous piece. Rav and Shmuel. Bor shechayv of Torah. When the Torah says that you're chayav when an animal falls into your pit, it's l'chavloi v'loi l'chavatoi. It's l'havoloi. It's the airspace that did its damage. The fact that it's very cramped and smelly and a foul odor, so you're chai because of that. However, not for the bang, not for the actual physical hitting of the animal. Why? Says Rashi, l'havol mishum de'ovid lehevel labor v'lo mishum chavatoi. So al maksavar chavat karka oilumhu demaskele, because the fall, it's not yours. It fell into on the ground. So if a person falls on the ground, I don't own the ground. So the issue is not the falling into the ground, which is obviously lowered because there's a pit. So the bottom of the pit, the fact that this animal got hurt, I'm not going to be chayiv for. I'm chayiv only because if the animal is there due to the foul odor and all the debris and garbage that's probably thrown into this pit, that could have caused injury to the animal. No, it's not referring to only the airspace, the foul smell, but also certainly the hit. So put the comma in the wrong place many years ago. So what if you say, so maybe chavatoi, the falling, the hurting is what the Torah is talking about, and not the smell. Why is everyone agreeing that you're chayav l'havoloi? So haTorah hi'idu alabor. The Torah testifies regarding this pit. V'fil mole sefugin shel tzemer, which is mashma even if it's filled with shearings of wool, which means it's like it's falling onto a trampoline. So you won't get hurt landing on these soft things. Still, the pasuk is talking about an animal being damaged. So how's it shaykh? We're talking about a boar. It doesn't make any difference what's on the bottom of this boar, even if it's svugin shel tzemer. It must be, says Rashi, the lake of chavata. It's not shaykh to be injured. So therefore, everyone must hold. The pasuk has to be talking about havoloi. The question is, how about chavatoi? Says Rashi. Shmuel says that it's chayiv for both. The afagav the havola memelo asile, even though havola comes memelo, but kosher chavatoi, the hit, the ihu oven le chavata, the he did the hit, fine. Okay, so according to, again, everyone holds your chayiv havoloi. The question is chavatoi. So my binayu, so you can probably think of the difference. The Gemara says, the difference is the Avad Goiva B'Rishus Harabim, that a person, the Avad Goiva, says Rashi, you made a tail, this heap, Gavoa Sarah, 10 Tvachim high in the Rishus Harabim. It's not a pit, but you made this huge pile. Ba'ola Shambor, and an ox went there, v'nafal, and it fell while it was on the top of this heap. Dahach leika havola el chavat. There's no possibility of the odor. The odor is only because it's trapped inside a big hole. But if it's a big heap of earth, so it's getting all the fresh air all around it. So there's no havola, there's only chavato, it falling. So that's the case. Basically, it's just telling us a case where there's chavata not havoloi. So the Avid Goyim Rishus Harabim, the Rav a Goyim Machayev. According to Rav, you're not chayev. The Shmuel a Goyim Nami Machayev. So you made a mound and an animal climbed up and hurt itself. Here, there's only chavata, no issue of the air. So that is question 8. Or some part of question 8. Let's see. Omarab bor shechayv alav tayra havala v'chavata. Shmuel Omer havala v'kosher chavata. Menoli l'Rav. How does Rav know? How does Rav know the havala v'lo chavata? That's only havala, not chavata, which we said is because there is the chavato is the hit. Rashi says over here, dafkel chavato v'lo havolo dehamameluhu ve'iluhu avdi. So this is what he says over here. Diamer krav and nafal, that it says it fell ad sheyipol derech nefila. So it's only if it's derech nefila, in the normal way of it falling. Umashma b'oimik v'loy b'goyva deika chavata. So it has to be a situation where it fell, which means it's ba'oimik. It fell down. Not that it's talking about some heap. I guess we didn't actually see this yet. But this is the pshat, that the reason why your putter is because the pasuk is v'nafal. It's talking about dafka situation of a boar. However, it's begoiva, it's a heap, de'ika chavata, where there's a situation of chavata, there's no havala. All there is chavata. So, therefore, that's how Rav knows that you're only chayv for havala but not chavata. Because the other way around of the heap, there's chavata, no havala. But the pasuk doesn't talk about that case. It doesn't talk about it climbing to the top of a heap. It talks about that it falls, mashmeh falls deep into a pit. And when it falls into a pit, it's havala v'lo chavata. And then question 8b, my time the chavtoi pshit tvei mahavaloi. Why is hitting more pashut than havala? So because the havala memela asilei, mashen ken chavata ihu avid lei. Okay, which is what we saw in that Rashi. So my time to Rav, and we just saw this, and I went a little bit too far ahead of myself. My time to Rav, the Amar Krav and Nafal ad shibul derech nefila. So it's clear that it died because it landed on the ground. It fell down, right? Or you could say, Rashi says, ba'oimik mashmav al panav. It fell on its face. It died because it landed on its face into the pit, the face first, and therefore the smell is what killed it. Ushmul v'nafal kol dehu mashma. Fine. Tanan im kain loma nemer borma. So why does it say a pit? Ma bor sheish bo kadei l'hamas asar tefachim av kol sheish bo kadei l'hamas asar tefachim. So bishlam l'shmuel that it's 10 tefachim deep. Av koil lasui goiva. It's coming to include not only a pit but also a mound. El rav af kol lasui mai lasui charitzin uneitzin. As we said, all different types of pits, whether they're wide or narrow. So charitzin eitzin behedu katani. We already saw that. Yeah, ton of ahadim afarish. We mentioned it, but then we explain it. The hani kul the katani lamuli. So why do we need all these different cases? Just pasha. Why do we need all these different types of pits? Sricha. Ditana bor havamina bor asarahu deis be havala. When it comes to a pit, which is 10 tvachim deep, there's haval, there's sour, poor odor, mishum de katan ukricha, because it's narrow and round. Avol siach the arich. However, when it comes to a siach which is longer, ema ba'asar leis behavala, maybe even if it's 10 tvachim, it still doesn't have this this odor. V'itana siach having a siach asar hu deis behavala mishum de katan. Even though it's very long, it's also very narrow. It's long, but it's narrow in width. Abu ma'ara, when it comes to a ma'ara, de maraba, it's completely square. Ema ba'asar leis b'havala. Therefore, it has more space equal around it. So therefore, maybe even at 10, it doesn't have this smell. V'tani mara havamina mara ba'asar hu deis b'havala. Maybe at 10 tefachim it has this smell. Mishum demit talala, because it is covered up. Because it is covered up. Okay, by the nature of it being like a cave. Of a charitzin deloy metalale, which metalale is similar to the word sukkah, a cover. Ema ba'asar leis behu havala. Maybe even if it's 10, it doesn't have the smell. The itan at charitzin, if I mention the case of charitzin, went wide, havimina charitzin asarhu deis behu havala mishum deleis behu revicha mil'el, because it doesn't have a lot of space above. Deleis behu revicha mil'el tfei matatoi. Avon itzin, however, an itzin which is narrow, dermarviach mil'el, it's wider at the top, tfei metatoi, more at the bottom, emisar leis behu havala, maybe the foul odor can easier escape, kamash malan. And therefore, again, according to all these things, the reason why we mention them, they all are 10 tefachim, even though you would think, based on the shape, maybe the odors would either stay there, or even at 10 tefachim, less than 10 tefachim, or 10 tefachim wouldn't be enough. So we say no, when it comes to all these things, the din is the same. Okay, we're going to stop here. Let's look at question TA8. Itmar. Bor shechayv olav Torah. Rav omer havav chavatay. Shmuel omer kosher chavatay. My time to Rav umay binayu. That's an easier question. It's nice when you get a nice, easier question. So the answer is, the machlokas obviously is a case of chavatay, which has to do with the case of the heap. And the reason, the Ovid Goiva, and the reason why he disagrees is the pasuk is v'nafal, ad sheipol derech nefila, ba'oimik ve'al panav, that it fell on its face into this odor and this terrible smell. It was stuck in, it was based on the smell and this air quality, it couldn't breathe basically, and that's how it ended up dying. Question TB9. Ma bor sheish bo k'nei l'hamis u'tfachem af koil, so to anything sheish bo hamas. Ma bo hamishno rabos ba'af koil. So what is this coming to include? So according to Shmuel, it's coming to include goiva, that even if there's a heap, you're still going to be chai for that. Now Rabbi says it's coming to include siach umara charitzin the itzin, even though it's mentioned already, but tanim afarish adkam.